Peace and blessings, everyone. Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Edgewenka, and we have a packed show for you this evening. Of course, I have Dr. Angel Smith. He's going to be talking about the lecture coming up at HLSCC on Thursday, the 23rd, from slavery, transition from slavery to freedom. Also, I have Mrs. Noeline Levens-Clark. She's the National AIDS Program Coordinator. She's going to be talking about HIV, giving us a report on what's been happening over the last year, and we're going to talk about testing and all kinds of things related to HIV. And then we're going to have Rodney Skelton talking about the upcoming music festival, all the acts that's coming up, and logistics, how we're going to get back and forth, and all the fun we're going to have. Keep it locked right at the Spotlight. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
Spotlight is brought to you by the National Bank of the Virgin Islands, Clarence Thomas Limited, the BVI Tourist Board, and CCT Global Communications.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm here with Dr. Angel Smith, Director of Virgin Island Studies at the H. Larry South Community College. Welcome, my brother. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me. Good night.
Yes. Lecture coming up on the 23rd, Thursday the 23rd at 7:30 p.m. at Eileen Parsons Auditorium. And lectures will be becoming more frequent.
Yep.
You're really making the HLSCC the center of intellectual discussion.
Yeah, well, this is again now the first of a series of lectures on the theme of emancipation. This year is 175 years of full freedom in the British Caribbean. And as a result of that, the college's input into our overall emancipation celebrations is a lecture on the whole concept of emancipation. The first one being at HLSCC this week on Thursday, 7:30, and after that, next week, we'll do one at the college's Virgin Gorda campus at the Enid Pickering building in Virgin Gorda at 7:30. And then that's on the 29th, on next week, Wednesday, the 29th. On Thursday, the 6th of June, in Anegada at the Claudia Criqui Educational Center at 7:30. And Sunday, the 9th of June, at Jos Van Dyke on the Methodist Church grounds.
And this all in celebration of the upcoming 175th year of Emancipation celebration.
Right.
Of emancipation, not emancipation celebration.
Yeah. Well, as you say, full freedom. Full freedom.
Now, before I get to the meat of the lecture, you ever think about doing a lecture on or some sort of information on celebration itself? How did we actually celebrate the emancipation from slavery once we understood what it meant and the exuberation, how exuberant it was, the celebration, how solemn it was, what that behavior was like? Because, you know, a lot of us have been talking over the years about how we are celebrating, and a lot of our celebration, and it's strange because you're saying vulgarity, but then when you're saying it's vulgar with the gyrations and all of the types of dances that we do in the streets, and the consumption of alcoholic beverages and all that sort of stuff. But I know African dance is very sensuous. Mm-hmm. So it's a fine line between sensuality and our culture and vulgarity. But in terms of celebration, is that something that you're thinking about that we
Well, I couldn't say definitely, but I would say that the fact that we have an annual festival tells us something. It's not a carnival. Mm-hmm. It's a totally different thing. Mm-hmm. And a festival celebration kind of thins more in terms of a religious or spiritual act, in terms of a festival to celebrate in that way, and which is an indication as to how, you know, the whole concept of emancipation was celebrated. Now, in the lecture, what I would focus on is what happened during that initial transition. The very first day, the 1st of August, 1834, what were the things that happened on that particular day in the Virgin Islands that was significant? Some of the things that we feel that we know, but in reality, that we don't know. because we have not really spent a lot of time looking at those issues. Now, why I said 1834, because that was in fact when the abolition of slavery took place in 1834. And we celebrate that. And in our history, we talk about freedom, August 1st, 1834, the Sunday morning well, the reading of the proclamation. But the reality is that the freedom that we are thinking about did not come in 1834. And there was a period of 4 years before the actual kind of freedom that our ancestors were looking forward to actually came, and meant that they came in 1838, hence this year being 175 years of full freedom. So that there was this transition period from 1834 to 1838, and lots of things happened in that period of time, and that's what the lecture would be focused on.
And to give us a little bit of what happened during that period of time, and without giving the full lecture.
Well, the reality is that, let's say in the Virgin Islands in particular, after 1811, which was the incident of the hanging of Arthur Hodge, slavery in the Virgin Islands took a totally different tone in terms of the relationship between the slave owners and the enslaved. A totally different relationship. The slaves in the Virgin Islands found themselves with a certain amount of privileges. In fact, the slaves in the Virgin Islands took privileges that weren't necessarily given. They took them on their own. And, this is what we will do as slaves. We don't do that, or we do this. For example, the Virgin Islands was found to have the highest rate of runaways that in any other area in the British Caribbean. So there was something different happening in the Virgin Islands with respect to slavery during that period. However, during the apprenticeship period, which is that period from 1834 to 1838, the weakened establishment of slavery in the Virgin Islands was strengthened by the apprenticeship system, and the kind of power that was now given to the slave owners then in a way sort of roll back the gains that the enslaved had attained over the years in the Virgin Islands. So they were now, they found themselves in a worse position than they would have been even when they were enslaved formally before 1834.
And how was that?
Well, because there were certain things that were happening, as I said, in the Virgin Islands, because the slave owners didn't have they didn't have a strong police force. They didn't have a strong army to manage whatever was happening. So it was between them and the enslaved. And in addition to the fact that most of the estates were run by absentee owners who were living in the United Kingdom and then were vested in some agencies here in the Virgin Islands who look over the estates. And basically all they were doing was trying to see how much money they could get out of the estates. They weren't really concerned about the welfare of the enslaved. So the slaves on the Virgin Islands then found that they had to do a lot more for themselves, and they then fend for themselves, ensure that they could survive in this kind of environment. So they had created for themselves a type of situation where they could survive. But during that transition period, that was all now coming apart because of the new issues that came to the fore, where, for example, there was a magistrate that was appointed in the Virgin Islands to hear complaints from the enslaved and also complaints from the slave masters. And the magistrate then could order punishment to the slaves because they felt that the master felt that they weren't doing the work to their satisfaction. And one of the things that they did more often was to order that they do extra work. So the time that a fellow would have spent working in his own private garden, now he has to go in the field and work for his master and leave his garden undone. So there were some serious things happening during that time that made life difficult for the enslaved in the Virgin Islands.
So instead of being freed, you sort of you became a legal indentured servant, but with now the right of the slaver to basically use the laws on his behalf.
Exactly. The laws that were passed to manage that transition period were in a way designed to put more pressure on the enslaved, because now what was happening was that the slave masters were saying something like, look, all right, in 4 years' time or in however X amount of years' time, you're going to be free. That means I can't get any more free labor out of you. So now for this next 4 years, I'm going to get my money's worth. And they're going to work them. And they work them harder.
Work it to death.
Yes, so the period, that transition period was probably more difficult. In fact, I've read some accounts from some of the other Caribbean islands, for example, in Jamaica, where accounts given by some of the enslaved themselves who were saying, well, look, they were not punished as severely when they were enslaved as when they were apprentices.
They were supposedly free.
No, they were supposedly free and called apprentices. They said that the kind of punishment that they got was far more than they had when they were slaves. You know, they never got beaten like that, the guy said, you know.
Well, did we have at that point then more rebellions or more hostility, more violent behavior on the part of the enslaved?
Well, I think that is one of the issues that I want to bring up, and that would be the point in the lecture that I want to bring up in terms of what was happening in the Virgin Islands, how the enslaved responded, how they responded.
This renewed brutality.
Exactly, this whole new thing, because remember, they didn't trust their slave masters. In fact, the enslaved in the Virgin Islands in particular was saying that they felt that this whole apprenticeship system was a conspiracy. It was a conspiracy that was put on by the white planters in the Virgin Islands to defraud them of the freedom that was granted by the king. You know, so they were saying the king had given them freedom, but the white planters were withholding it.
And they weren't having that.
They weren't having that. In fact, I'll give you one little snippet in terms of one of the anecdotes that I picked up, where the kind of behavior that the enslaved were exhibiting, that they were being punished for. I'll go through those during the lecture to show what was happening, because it gives you a better understanding of the dynamics that was taking place between the enslaved and their masters. But the enslaved were so rebellious in a way, but they felt that they were duly supported by the crown. Because it was rumored in the Virgin Islands that this is what they said: the king had taken his crown off and he would not put it back on until the slaves in the Virgin Islands were free.
So they had the backing of the king.
They figured they had the backing of the king. The king was opposed to how they were being treated.
Yeah, we're going to take a break and we're going to come right back with more about the transition from slavery to freedom right after these words from our sponsors.
Spotlight is brought to you by Virgin Island Motors, Tortola Concrete Limited, Bolo's High Tech Printery, and H. Lavity Stout Community College.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm here with Dr. Angel Smith, Director of Virgin Island Studies at H. Lavity Stout Community College, and we're talking about the upcoming lecture Thursday the 23rd at the Irene L. Parsons Auditorium. This is the 107th. This year, our Emancipation Celebration is going to mark the 175th year of full freedom, and leading up to the Emancipation Celebration will be a series of lectures.
Yes.
Right? And this one is entitled, the topic is Transition from Slavery to Freedom. Now, of course, during the time of the Emancipation announcement, proclaiming sounds like, some people had control. The announcement, it was a situation where the slavers felt they were being slighted. They had lost their property without compensation. And so they now are going through this transition period that you're going to talk about during the lecture, and giving the African people, African descendants, African people a hard time and trying to work on the debt before they could actually be free. And you're going to talk about what happened on Tortola was different than what happened, I suspect, on the other islands, where the other British Virgin Islands, where they had other African descendants, because I guess it would have been difficult to keep control of the whole situation.
Well, there was some difference in that the Virgin Islands could be divided into two distinct economic base. There's sugar on Tortola, which was actually the main sugar producer, and then on the Keys you had more in terms of cotton and keeping of animals and other things. Now, a lot of the things that relate to the apprenticeship period could be focused more in terms of what was happening specifically on the sugar plantation, the sugar estates within the British Caribbean, the Virgin Islands included. So when we look at the experiences of the enslaved in the Virgin Islands, we can see a distinction between what was happening on Tortola and also what was happening on the Keys. No, so the other lectures that I'll be doing in Virgin Gorda on Wednesday the 29th in Anegada Wednesday the 29th of May, on Thursday the 6th of June, and on Sunday the 9th of June. Those are the 3 lectures, again, would focus on that transition period between 1834 and 1838. But in those, I would look also specifically at what was happening in the Keys.
So when you say the Keys, you're talking about Virgin Gorda
Yeah.
and Anegada particularly?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay. Now, we're going to be celebrating 175 years of full freedom. Are we ever going to deal with what's being called post-traumatic slave syndrome? What has happened to us where we are now? Are we free mentally? You know, we heard Bob Marley's song, Emancipate Yourself from Mental Slavery. Are we free mentally? You consider that we have really evolved into a free people 175 years later, given our colonial status, and if you can include that and all.
But I think what we recognize is that there are some legacies of slavery, and until we understand what happened during that period, then we would not be able to even identify these legacies, these things that are happening within and around our society, which are a direct result of what happened during that time of slavery. And that's why I found the research, when I was doing the research, that's why I found it so interesting, because it gave me an opportunity to understand the Virgin Islands society of today, because then we look back at what was happening during that developmental phase, during slavery, as our ancestors, the process of of creolization, as they call it, over the years, when our ancestors adapted a new culture, a new way of life on these islands and made these islands their home. And we see certain things that they conditioned themselves to survive slavery. And they had to do that if they were going to survive. So it was very important for them.
Can you give us a couple of examples?
Well, if we look at, for example, if we look at the ability to feed themselves. Now, what I wouldn't get into that specifically in the lecture, but what was happening was that during the War of Independence, for example, with the United States, there was a blockade, and it was difficult to get food supplies into the British Caribbean. Saltfish from Newfoundland, other things that came in, and the slave masters recognized that they could not run an economy based on importing food. I think much as we do today, you know, we survive by importing food. They learned a hard lesson that they could not run a whole community and base their existence on the importation of food. And because of those blockades, they couldn't get food in. So there was a lot of starvation. And the general legislature in meeting in St. Kitts then passed a law saying that if you have X amount of slaves on an estate, you must have X amount acres of land so that they can plant food for themselves. What our ancestors did was that they took that with strides. They said, yeah, you're giving us land to plant food, no problem. We're going to plant our food, just give us time to do it. They fed themselves, and not only fed themselves, was able to sell some of the excess to be able to support themselves, so that then they created this whole internal economy. And in the Virgin Islands in particular, when sugar ceased to be the main economy, it was the internal economy that was established by the enslaved. Food production yeah. That became the new economy.
And when we're looking back at that history, Dr. Smith, we could see that spirit of entrepreneurship and independence.
Independence was the key.
That we have.
Yeah.
You know, we don't really like to work for people. We like to do have our own businesses.
But those are some of the points, even in the transition point from slavery to freedom, and that period of time where the planters were saying, well, look, you know, you have to work for me for free for 45 hours a week. That's mine. But then if I have a little extra work to do, I'll pay you. you know. But the enslaved was saying, well, look, we don't want no extra work. The extra time is our time. That's when we use to work our ground and plant our food to feed ourselves. You know, so they were conscious of that, and they used their time wisely to ensure that they provided for themselves and their families.
Well, certainly, from what you're discussing here right now, there's a whole lot more to come out from the lecture, and this is the 175th. This year is the 175th year of full freedom, full emancipation, and certainly, I think this is a very, very timely and very important lecture coming up on the 23rd, and also tell us the other dates in Virgin Gorda.
On the 23rd in Virgin Gorda, on Wednesday the 29th of May, the following week, next week Wednesday, on Thursday the 6th of June in Anegada, and Sunday the 9th of June in Joss Van Dyke.
Okay, so let's go. So this Thursday the 23rd.
23rd, Eileen L. Parsons, 7:30.
Next Thursday.
Next week Wednesday.
Next week Wednesday.
29th in Virgin Gorda at the Enid Pickering building at the college campus there, 7:30. And then the following week, Thursday, the 6th of June in Anegada at 7:30 at the Claudia Creaky Educational Center and in their school courtyard. And then Sunday, the 9th of June, on Joss Van Dyke at the Methodist Church grounds at 4:30.
Okay. Is any plans for anything coming up during the actual emancipation celebration, those 2 or 3 weeks that we're going to be celebrating? Anything we're going to be discussing regarding our celebration? Anything you're going to bring forward?
But I think that's why I felt compelled to do these now, because I'm going to be away during that period, and I have to go back to the UK and spend some time there during that period, coming back just towards the end. So that's why I'm using the time now to do the lectures.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming. Sorry we don't have more time. I know there's a lot to discuss, and I'm really appreciative of you taking the time to come and talk to us about the lecture that's coming up, and more importantly, that we are having these lectures.
Yes.
This information is now being disseminated through the H. South Community College. I think it's a great thing that we're doing to make sure that HLSCC becomes a center of historic documentation for us as a people here in the Virgin Islands. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks you very
again.
much.
And
Okay.
don't be a stranger.
All right.
Yes, we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back with Rodney Skelton. And he is, of course, involved with the coordination of the music festival, public relations. He's also the film commissioner with the Tourist Board. We're going to talk about what's happening with the music festival. And then after him, of course, we're going to talk about the upcoming regional testing day, and get a report from Noeline Clark about the progress we've been making with stopping the growth, curtailing the growth of HIV here in the territory. Keep it locked right at the Spotlight. We'll be right back.
Spotlight is brought to you by the National Bank of the Virgin Islands, Clarence Thomas Limited, the BVI Tourist Board, and CCT Global Communications.